Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today for my Live at 5 demo. It's actually been a little while since I've been able to do one of these, so I am excited to be back in my little studio here working on a portrait painting for you today. So I'm going to paint this beautiful young lady here. She is 101 years young right now, and I'm excited to be painting this piece for her granddaughter. So this is Ruth Lee, and I edited my reference photo that my client sent me just to enhance the color a little bit and bring out some more interesting shapes. And now I have my outlines on my panel, and I just added a really light wash just to indicate kind of where the forms are and what those outlines are telling us. So I started with just gessoing my canvas, and then I did my outlines using alizarin crimson, Payne's gray, and white, which makes this really nice pale purple. And then when I did my wash, I just used the alizarin crimson and Payne's gray for the wash. And I just thinned my paint down. Now, the reason that I didn't add any white to it when I did my wash is if I added the white, it would make it opaque. And I wanted to still be able to see my lines that I put down. So I just used the alizarin crimson and Payne's gray. And so this is dry, and it's ready for me to jump in and start working on it. Hi, Gabriella. And everyone who's watching, please feel free to jump in and say hi, and I would love for you to ask questions. That is why you are here watching it live. So take advantage of that. I'm going to be checking back periodically to see what questions you might have or comments. Hi, Lynn, and we will get started. All right, so like I said, I just did this very loose wash, and now my next step that I am going to do is I am going to look for some of the darker tones. So this whole image is very light. We have a white background, white hair, and so really the darkest tones are going to be in her eyes. So I'm going to start there, just deepening those a little bit. And after I push some of these darker tones, then I'm going to do my underpainting wash. Hi, Vicki. And some of you who have watched my demos before, you know that I like to play around with my underpaintings and use some really bright colors and then layer on top. So this piece will be similar to that. And if we have any new people who are watching this for the first time, I just want to say thank you so much for watching my demo. I do these every Monday for the most part at 5 Eastern. Sometimes it's portraits, sometimes it's animals, sometimes flowers. We do all different things. So be sure to follow my page so that you find out about those things. And I also teach online classes if you're interested in that too. All right, here we go. So I'm going to start with my dark tone, and I'm just going to use my alizarin crimson and Payne's gray. That is my combination that I use pretty often for a dark tone. It makes like a nice dirty dark purple. I never ever use black paint because this is much more luscious and pretty than using straight black. Vicki is asking, do I record with my phone or a camera? Well, right now I'm just using my iPhone to do this Facebook Live. The camera on the iPhone is really good, so works just fine. All right, so I've got a pretty little brush here. I don't normally use brushes this small, but it's got a little hair on it. We'll see if this one will work. If there's a little fuzz on your brush, it will pick up the paint. I think we're good now. Okay. So when you are doing eyes that are not very clear in your picture, which these are not, it's a little bit hard to see. you want to make sure that you don't overwork them. So I'm not going to paint these in too perfectly because that would look weird. I'm just going to paint what I see. So I'm just looking for some of these dark shadows and just kind of giving some indication of what's going on there, but I'm not painting them in any more clearly than what I see in my image. Hi Laura, thank you. I'm glad that the underpainting looks good. Hopefully it'll stay looking good as I layer on top. So now my next darkest area that I see is just that little crevice in her ear. And I'm gonna thin my paint out just a little bit so that it's not quite as dark. And I'm going to add some shadow under her nose. I need to get some new small brushes. I don't usually keep very many of them around because usually I paint bigger and I don't paint with these tiny little brushes. But this is an 8x10 panel, so I'm needing to use a little bit smaller brush to get in there. Hi Minetta. All right, so just kind of bouncing around, looking where else I see some darker shadows. I don't see anything else that's quite that dark. So I'm going to add a little more water to my mixture to lighten it up a little bit. And then I'm just going to start looking for some of the next darkest shadows and just push those a little bit before I do my underpainting wash. Just gonna push those a tiny bit darker. All right, got some little bits of eyebrows there, some shadow under the hair. All right, I think that might be all of the shading that I want to do before doing my underpainting wash. Maybe I'll just push this a little bit further. That upper lip is a little bit darker too. A good rule of thumb when you're doing lips is that the upper lip is pretty much always darker than the lower lip because the lower lip is getting a highlight and the upper lip is in shadow. So you can pretty much go by that unless somebody is really strangely lit with like a light shining up their face or something. Most of the time, the upper lip is going to be in shadow. Put a little bit more shadow in the ear. Okay, so now I'm going to do my underpainting wash. Looking at your questions here, Laura is asking, do you use any aids to transfer your sketch for that precision, like a grid method or tracing? Awesome question. I trace when it is this small. I just print my image out in black and white and I use a piece of transfer paper. In fact, why don't I show you? I have the image right here. Hang on 1 second. So I printed my image pretty light so that I could see. And then I just looked for like the major edges of forms and breaks in shadow and I traced over them with my handy tracing paper behind it. And then that put a very accurate roadmap on for me. So, you know, I don't feel like I want to try to prove anything with my drawing skills. I could draw it on there, but this saves so much time and it allows you to be really accurate when you start your painting. So that's how I start all my small paintings. And when I do a larger painting, I project my outlines. All right, so now for my underpainting wash. I am going to use my go-to color for that, which is Permanent Dark Violet. I like to put that underneath skin tones almost always because it looks really good underneath skin. And I'm going to thin it out really, really thin because I don't want to go too light with my Permanent Dark Violet. I'm sorry, too dark, because I can always go back and add another layer of it. and her skin's pretty light. So I'm just going to wash right over all of it. You know, I'm not being too careful about staying in my lines. In fact, I like to kind of go outside the outlines of the face because it just kind of makes that edge a little softer rather than having a perfectly clean edge. So I'm just doing this wash right on top of all those shadows that I already put down. And I'll let it kind of go up into the hair. I don't think I'm going to do purple for the hair. I gotta think about what I want to put there. But I'm going to put purple for the neck, and in the neck, the skin is showing up a little bit darker, so I'm going to lay my purple down a little bit heavier in the neck. All right, yep, Laura, so you learned a little bit about my projector when I did my Inspire demo for the Inspire mural. Awesome. Yeah, I love that projector, and I wish that the company wouldn't have changed so that I could recommend exactly what it's called, but I don't know. I don't know who makes it now, but it's a 2-inch by 2-inch cube. If that's what you can find, it's probably that one. Okay, I think I've got a nice wash on the skin. Now for her shirt, I think I will do kind of a burnt orange wash, which is a color I use a lot for my underpainting because the shirt is going to be blue. And so I usually kind of go by opposites. So opposite of blue on the color wheel would be orange, but I don't want it to be like a glowing, intense orange. So I like to make my burnt orange using alizarin crimson and Hansa yellow opaque. It just makes a nice orange that's like over the top. So that's what I'm going to use here. And I'm going to thin it out because her shirt is not very dark either. It's pretty light. So I try to kind of match my underpainting with the amount of brightness that the final color will have. And I'm maybe a bit dark there. Put a little more water in there to wash some of that off. Push it over here. I'm using a really smooth panel. I just ordered these and I like them. I think I do. I got them from Jerry's Artorama and they were super inexpensive. And this is a 2-inch deep cradle, which I like. And I think I got a 4-pack from Jerry's for like $17. They're Da Vinci panels. So they're pretty nice. All right, and I think actually I'm gonna use this same orange tone for the hair because her hair is like a white grayish tone and usually that kind of blue. So I'm going to just call that blue and I'm going to use my same underpainting for the hair. And the areas of her hair that are going to be the lightest, like up towards the top, I'm gonna thin my paint out a little bit more so that the underpainting is not so dark. So there we go. I don't think it's that high. I probably have to trim that down a little bit. Trim. Okay. Let's see. Someone says, first time watching, you saw my golden tube. Is that my favorite brand? Yes, it is. I buy all golden fluid acrylics. That's what I like to paint with. Okay, so the background it was a white wall, but I kind of enhanced the color a little bit in my image because I didn't want it to be just white. So I'm going to push the color on the left side of her to a cooler neutral, and on the right side, I'm going to push it to a little bit warmer neutral. So for my underpainting, I'm going to flip that because we're always going on opposites for the underpainting. So I think, you know, I can do whatever I want with this. I think I'm just actually going to do magenta under the whole thing. Because magenta could actually read as a warm or a cool. It's like a red, but it's a very cool purpley red. And nice. Oh, it's a little too dark. I'll thin that out. And part of why I'm choosing this magenta is I'm seeing this tone in her lips, on her lipstick. So I think it'll look really pretty to have some of that just kind of being married with brown tones. So I like to kind of unify my pieces by using some of the colors that I see for the final color, using some of it in my underpainting. It's just kind of fun. I always get a lot of questions about the underpainting, like what colors to use and why I'm doing it. But I think you'll find the more of these demos that you watch, or if you take some of my online classes, there is like a method behind my madness. And sometimes it's just a matter of going through the motions until you really get why I'm doing what I'm doing. But it's not all just willy-nilly. Some of it is, but not all of it. Okay. And most of the time my underpainting is pretty warm. I usually like to layer on top of warmer colors. All right. So now we've got a little bit of color everywhere, and now I'm going to start just pushing some of the shadows a little bit more. And I'm going to start doing that with some umber light. Which is a really nice warm brown that I use quite a bit. And now that I'm through with the underpainting, I'm not going to thin my paint with water anymore. I'm going to start thinning it with glaze. It just gives the paint, it makes it have a little bit more body to it, so it's not running. But it also makes it just kind of have a little more of a luscious quality to it. So I'm going to go in with just this burnt umber and some glaze and just start pushing my shadows a little bit more. I'm really paying attention to the color that things actually are. I'm just paying attention to the value. So we kind of did that. I did some of that already with these darker purple washes, but I'm just going to push it a little more. And there really aren't a lot of dark shadows on her, like I mentioned before. And I'm not attempting to like cover up all of my purple. I want to keep some of that fun purple color. In fact, I think I'm going to add a little purple to my brown. I'm going to do that. I'm going to warm it up with some of that permanent dark violet. So now I've got burnt umber light and permanent dark violet going here with some glaze. And I'm using a pretty big brush. This is a 5. So I don't always use those small brushes. Really, my rule of thumb is just use the biggest size brush that you can because it makes your brush strokes feel a little more natural rather than so choppy, and saves you time and just a lot of reasons. So I only get down into those small little brushes when I'm really needing to get super accurate with the small details. We've got some of these dark tones in her eyes. I'm actually going to wash right over the whole eye because the whites of the eyes are very dark here. Definitely chime in and ask me any questions that you might be wondering. I'm happy to give you an answer, or at least attempt to. So at this point, like I said, we're not worrying about just looking at the shapes and kind of like carving them out. All right. And now I think I actually want to push all of the neck a little bit darker. And rather than continuing with the kind of that brown color, to add another wash of my purple because I want to get some more vivid purple colors in there. So I'm just going to go right over it with that permanent dark violet. Push that a little bit darker. I think maybe I should have had that a little darker in my first layer. And now we'll push that a little darker in the ear too, and this side of the face. And as I'm trying to find these dark shadows, I'm making a point to kind of squint when I look at my piece, and I'm kind of sitting back a little bit just to compare. When you squint at your painting, that helps you to not get too hung up on the details and really just focus on the larger forms that you're dealing with. Margie's asking, how do you choose your subjects when it's not a commission? So it's pretty much always a commission. The only time that I am usually painting people that are not for clients is when I'm painting my own kids. And I also did some portraits of my niece and nephews that I gave to my brother for his birthday. But otherwise, most of the time I am painting commissions. And I was excited to have this one ordered because I just think she's so pretty, and the shapes and colors are going to be so beautiful. But if I had all the time in the world, I would just paint everybody whenever I want to. But right now, it just has to be for a job. But lucky me that I love to do my job. Right, I think I have enough base built up. So now it's time to start adding the color. So this, like the frosting, this is the fun part when it's really going to start to take on the life of the picture. So I'm going to start with kind of pulling out my highlights in the face. This gets to be kind of the scary part where we're switching over to the skin tones and knowing how to go about that. But what I usually say is we look for about the lightest 50%, and I make my skin tone using white and Pyrrole Red Light, Hansa Yellow Opaque, and a little bit of Burnt Umber. So those 4 colors in different quantities is pretty much how I paint all skin. Regardless of the tone of the skin, those 4 colors are how I make it. And it's funny, when you start layering over this purple underpainting, it has a tendency to look more yellow than what it really is. So I usually err on the side of adding a little bit extra red to offset that. I also have some glaze mixed in here. All right, and I'm just gonna start looking for those lighter shapes. And I'm still using this pretty big brush. And I'm making a point to not cover up all that purple. So I'm being kind of delicate with how much I'm putting down to start out with. I'm just kind of bouncing around, looking for those lighter tones and not trying to cover everything. And while I'm laying it down, I'm thinking about the direction of the form. So, for example, I'm going to put some on the nose, take it down the bridge of the nose. I'm not going to do a bunch of hashes going all different directions. Oh, I got a little too fat there. But I'm actually kind of tracing the shape as I go around it. It's almost like sculpture. It's like really thinking about your piece being a 3-dimensional object that you're finding. Lynn is asking, do I use a lot of glaze in the first layer of the skin tone? So right now, I guess I don't really know what a lot is, but you know, you just kind of play with how transparent you want it to be. So it just depends on your and on the colors that you're trying to bring in. So we've got some highlights there. And now I think I've got a little highlight under the eye that I want to get in. And I'm not even switching down to a little brush, the corner, get that in. We've got a little bit under that eye. All right, now I think I am going to actually go a tad darker because I was going to bring this down a little bit more into the shadow, but it really needs to get warmer and darker in that area. So the way that I'm going to make it a little bit darker is I'm going to do a little bit of pyrrole red and a little bit more burnt umber. And maybe just a pinch more of that yellow too. So basically everything except for my white. I'm going to try a little glaze in there too. And sometimes I don't know if the color is correct until I lay it down and see how it looks. Yeah, I think that works. And I do not do any blending. So now that I'm moving to this next color, I'm still just kind of laying it down. I'm not trying to blend it in with my first layer. But since I've got some glaze in here and the paint is kind of transparent, it's allowing that purple to show through, which is kind of interesting. So I never ever try to mix colors. I just lay them next to each other and let them do their thing. It's like we're making steps to make a gradient, which is going to give form to our subject. And now that I've darkened this, I can use this to put some of the highlights in on the neck because the whole neck is darker than the face, like I mentioned before. So our brightest highlights on the neck are not as bright as the brightest highlights that we have on the face. And I think I'm gonna leave a little bit extra of that purple on the neck because I think that's gonna be kind of cool. I'm gonna add a little bit more red to warm up my mixture just a little bit more. Just put some of these slightly more red tones in there. I really like this pyrrole red light for skin. It's a very nice warm red. If you've watched my demos before, you've heard me talk about it, but I know we always have new people, so I like to just go over some of the things that are the most important, and sometimes it's good to hear it again. All right. Okay, so now I started with that mid-tone, then I went slightly warmer. We'll put some of those slightly warmer tones down here too. All right, now I'm going to go in and go brighter than that first layer. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Oh well. Okay, so now I'm going to pick a color that's going to be a notch brighter than this first tone that I did. So it's still going to be the same color recipe, the pyrrole red, Hansa yellow, opaque, burnt light, and white, but now it's going to have more white in it. And maybe slightly less glaze because we want it to be a little more opaque as I go into some of these highlights. So I'm looking for the very brightest areas on the face, which is the nose. And this will go even brighter, but I like to kind of take baby steps because I don't want it to be too big of a jump. And I like to save my very brightest areas for the very end of the piece. But you can see how this is going to just give a lot more dimension in these highlights. got it pretty bright under her nose too. That upper lip is pretty bright. Got a bright shadow under the chin, a little bit on her lip. Oh, we've got some pretty bright highlights on the ears here too. And I still have this great big brush. See how big it is? This is probably, I don't know, 1/3 of an inch. So on this tiny painting, it can be done. And that is a good way to keep yourself from getting too detailed, is by sticking with a bigger brush for a longer time, because you just can't fit the details in there using a great big brush. Okay, so now I want to get some color in the hair. I still have a lot of work to do in the features and the face, but I like to just jump around, and for me right now, having this like orange hair is just distracting, so I want to get some of my color going on in the gray white hair. So I'm going to kind of build my way up to these brightest areas at the top. So I'm going to start with it slightly darker, and I'll make my gray using Payne's gray, a little bit of alizarin crimson, so it's gonna be kind of like a purple, but a little bit more of the Payne's gray. And I think I'm gonna add a little bit of burnt umber in there too, yeah. A little more Payne's gray. Oh, Jen, this is her grandmother that I'm working on. And this picture was taken on her 100th birthday. That is so cool. I love it. I paint a lot of kids. I don't always paint as many older people, so this is really a treat. It's fun. Okay, so I've got my darker gray. I'm gonna start with the darker gray areas and put some of this in and thin it out with a little more glaze because I wanna leave more of my underpainting showing. So I already found where a lot of these shadows are when I was doing my earlier layers. I kind of mapped out some of these shadows. So that tells me exactly where I need to put these darker gray tones because I've already got my roadmap in there. So it makes it really fast to just go in and plop them in because I've already found them. I don't want to get too carried away with the hair because we don't really see a lot of dimension in her hair. It's very soft. Got a little bit coming in here. And the focus is, I want it to be more on her face than her hair. So I don't want to get too carried away with how I'm representing the hair. Okay, so I think those are my dark tones. Now I'm going to add some white to it to lighten it up and start bringing out some more of the light tones. So I'm just going to add some white in there. And since I put all that white in, I think I need to add some more glaze so it's not quite so opaque. All right, so now start pulling out some more highlights. Yeah, so this is kind of a big jump between my first layer and this next one, but I think it's gonna be okay because I want the hair to get really light. It kind of melts into the background, which I think is going to be kind of cool. I have quite a few portrait commissions coming up, and I think I'm going to try to, as much as I can, do these for my Live at 5 demos. So if you ordered a portrait, you might get to watch it painted live. I was running a portrait sale in the month of July. I had discount pricing on all of my portrait orders, But you can still order portraits, you just wouldn't get the discount pricing. So I only do that sale once a year every summer. And I had a whole bunch of people go ahead and jump in and do that. So that's always fun when I've got a bunch of nice portraits lined up. Okay. I love painting gray tones because there's actually so much fun color showing up in grays that is unexpected. You usually have a lot of blues and some purples. So it's fun to represent that in kind of interesting ways. All right, and while we are up here in the hair, I think I'm going to start doing some of the background too, because I want to separate this hair from the background where I made it come up a little bit too far. So, as I said, I was going to do more cool tones in the background over here and more warm over here. So I'm going to take some white and I'm going to add a little tiny bit of phthalo blue, and phthalo blue is super strong, so I'm just going to use the smallest amount of it, and then I'm going to knock it down with some of my gray mixture that I had going before. All right, make a nice cool. I need a little more glaze. Get a little bit more of that. Okay. All right, I think this will be a nice cool for the background. We'll see how this looks. Yeah, and I'm going to really make a point to leave some of that pink underpainting in my background because I put it there for a reason and I think it's gonna look really interesting. Need a little more white. The background's pretty light right here. And sometimes I like to get into the background while I'm still figuring tones, because when I paint a bright color behind the person, the result is it makes that person look a little bit darker. So sometimes I might think, oh, I need to darken my skin tone, it's too light, but really all I need to do is lighten the background, and that'll make the skin tone look darker. Kind of got like this glowing effect around her, which I like. And actually, I can use some of this bright, cool color in some of my highlights right on the hair while I'm at it. Once I've got it on my brush. And you see how I'm kind of doing like some just loose, kind of jerky, quick movements as I put in the hair. If you put your hair down too slowly, it just starts to look awkward. So you kind of just think about like following the hair and just doing like a quick stroke, and that's it. And just let it feel like very confident. Because something about it, if you pause while you're doing it, it's like the person looking at the painting can tell that you were like afraid to lay it down. But if you just lay it down, it feels more confident. I don't know, maybe I'm just babbling, but that's what's going through my head right now. All right, so I'm gonna get it a little bit darker over here, adding a little bit more blue and a little bit more gray just to make a deeper tone. My blue got too dark, that took over. That phthalo blue, man, that color will just eat your piece up if you use too much of it. Okay, that's still too dark. All right. Okay, enough of that background over there. Oh, now I'm gonna do some warm background over here. So for my warm background, I'm going to do white and some alizarin crimson, a little bit of Hansa yellow. I need more white. I go through a lot of white paint. I don't go through a lot of the other colors, but definitely a lot of white. All right. So this is going to be kind of like a tan pink color. Just start putting some of that in. All right, that's enough of that right now. I might cover up more background later. All right, well, now I might as well just put a little color on her shirt too before I start working into the details of the portrait. So I'm gonna use some phthalo blue. Actually, I'm gonna use some of the color that I was using in the background here, but I'm gonna let it be a little bit more blue. Kind of muddied it up with a little bit of burnt umber. I'll start just, oh, I think I need to thin that out to a little bit more of my burnt orange show. And the brightest part of her shirt is this edge right here, also over there. So maybe I'll just drop those areas in right away so I can make sure those stay the brightest. So it's kind of bright on that shoulder and along this edge. And that's the brightest. So the rest of it's going to be darker. So I'm gonna go back and make my puddle a little darker. I'm adding a little bit of Payne's Gray into my mixture, a little more burnt umber, and then just a touch more of that phthalo blue. You don't want to make it darker with just the phthalo blue because then what happens is it gets darker, but it also gets much more intense, and we don't want that. So we want it to get darker and a little less saturated, a little more grayed out. So I'm just kind of looking for these darker values now. Add a little more glaze to thin it out, let some more of that orange show through. And when I've got a pretty large area that's all one color, I don't want a bunch of little hashes. So I'm just gonna lay a brush stroke down and leave it alone. Just let it fill in the whole thing. All right, that's enough for the shirt right now, I think. Now I will switch down to a little bit smaller brush, and I'm going to start adding some details. And I'm just gonna look and see what time we have. Oh, great. We still have 17 minutes. I try to keep these demos an hour or less. So this piece won't be finished, but we'll get it pretty far along. So I really want to get her lips in there. So I'm going to bring this highlight in on the lower lip. And for that, I'm going to use some of that magenta that I mentioned before and a little bit of white. But that's a little too purple for me. So I'm gonna add a little bit of my Pyrrole red light to make it a little bit more pink. I can see I need some more white in there. And we'll see how this looks. That's too light. So I think I actually need to use a different red. I'm going to use a little bit of cadmium red, which is more of like a fire truck red. So sometimes you just can't get the color that you want unless you use a different red. Like I just couldn't mix that color. Okay, it's dry. Okay, there. I wanted it to be a little bit more of a pinky tone. And I'm gonna put just a touch of that on her upper lip. There we go. Now this is the brightest part in the center here. It gets a little bit darker towards the edge. So to do that, I'm going to darken it a little bit with some alizarin crimson, which is like a burgundy. Because I don't want to darken it with my dark, like intense red, because that's not really what I'm seeing. It's more in shadow. And while I've got that on my brush, I'm just gonna put a little bit of that under the nose too. Just start building some shadow there. And I see some red shadows around the eyes too. So with this kind of muddier red, I'm gonna also start working those a little bit. So I like to kind of dance around my piece whenever I make a color and see where else can I put this color. And I think it gives the piece unity, and it also makes my painting go more quickly. So I'm not remixing the colors, I'm just using it while it's on my brush. All right, now we need to do that darker upper lip. Like I mentioned, the upper lip is always darker than the lower lip. And so I'm going to use a little bit more of that cadmium red, the fire truck red, but I also want to mute it with some of my alizarin crimson too. We'll see if that is going to work. I think so. All right, I want her lower lip to pop just a little bit more. So I think I'm gonna bring that highlight just a pinch. Maybe just a tiny bit. Now that I look at it, it doesn't really need to be that much brighter, but I'm gonna do it. So I'm just gonna add a little more white to that mixture that I was using and just add a tiny bit more high. Oh, that was too much. I know I've heard from some of you that you've had trouble mixing colors and figuring out how to make the colors that you want. And what I'll say is it comes with practice, but you know, I've been doing this my whole life, professionally for, I don't know, 20 years. And I still make mistakes where I just decide, oh, I don't have that color quite right. And then I just fix it. So it's not, you know, it's not something to get too worried about. You just kind of adjust it and make it work. Okay. Now I want to just work her eyes a little bit more, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to zoom right in on the eyes when I do that. That's why I love working on my iPad, because I can just focus on just the features that I'm working on, and it helps me to not get too distracted with some of the other things. So I'm going to grab a little brush, if I can find one. All right, I don't have one as small as I would like. I was going to look for one of my little skinny script liner brushes, but I don't have it. So I will just paint it with a number 1. So I'm going to just look at these shapes. We see hardly any indication of the iris color on the left eye. On the right eye, it looks very grayed out. We see just the tiniest little bit. So I'm going to mix up this kind of gray color and just give a very subtle touch showing the iris. Amy's asking about how I hold my iPad up. So this is a tripod, just like a regular tripod. It's actually super old. It's just for like a regular camera, but they make a holder for the iPad that screws right into it. So I bought the holder on Amazon, I think. And it works really well. All right, so talking about that kind of bluish color, so I'm using I actually already had the color in my palette. It was that Payne's Gray and some of what I used for her her shirt. So I'm gonna try just dabbing a little bit of that in, and it might be even too bright. We're just gonna try a little bit. Yeah, I think it might be. I'm gonna use it actually for the lid on the other side. Okay, so I have to build up these lids a little bit with some purple because I didn't quite get that shadow in dark enough. So I'm going to, you know what, I'm actually just gonna use my permanent dark violet that I used for my underpainting. I'm gonna build that shadow up with that. So I think probably like one of the best tips that I can give is when you are painting a person, don't let your brain take over and don't start trying to paint things the way you think they should be, like the color you think skin is or the shape that you think an eye is. Just turn your brain off and paint what you see. It won't steer you wrong. So if you start thinking, well, this is the shape of an eye and this is the color, it's going to make your piece look unnatural and not representative of your piece. But if you really just go directly from what you're seeing, that'll help you to stay on course. So in the corner of the eye, I see more of a red shadow. So I'm going to use some Pyrrole red, and I'm gonna add it to my purple. Some Pyrrole red, and that purple was my permanent dark violet. And I'm going to add some white to lighten that up a little bit, and a little bit of Hansa yellow. A little more red, a little more Hansa yellow, a little more purple. I added too much white. So I'm gonna put that nice dark warm shadow in there. Oh, it's still not dark enough. Let's go in with the red and the purple, see how we can get it darker. So the skin has a tendency to always look darker around the eyes and the ears and the nose, actually. Ooh, got a big old glob. Okay, I think I can use this dark red color in a few more places to just start bringing some more dimension into our eyes. And I can use this nice dark red under the nose too, because I've got a really strong dark shadow under the nose. And actually the upper lip needs a little bit darker tone as well. I'm gonna zoom back out, see where else I can put this. So I know that I'm gonna have some of this darker red under the ear and inside the ear. Okay, looking at our time again, we've got about 5 minutes left. So this piece is not done, but it is definitely getting there. Just looking at your questions here, Grace is asking, what filter do you use on the original photo and did you adjust it at all? So I use an app called PixArt, and the filter that I like best is called the Geode filter. So yes, I did filter this photo, and I pretty much filter all of my photos because I like simplifying those forms a little bit before I get started. It just gives me a better idea of the direction I want the painting to go, and it helps me to keep from getting too hung up on the details. So I always filter my photos. And the geode filter in that PixArt app, it just brings out some really interesting colors that you might not notice otherwise. So that one's really helpful. All right, I am going to just go in and keep pulling some of those skin highlights out before we finish up here. Just add a couple extra pops of brighter skin tone. So I'm using my same skin color recipe, but now I'm using hardly any of that burnt umber. It's mostly white, pyrrole red, light, and white. And I'm just looking for those very brightest areas. Yep. That's what we needed. I'll probably go even brighter yet with this, but for right now, this is a nice step up from what I had. Starting to give it some more dimension. And when you're painting wrinkles, a good thing to remember is to not actually paint the crevice of the wrinkle. Paint the skin around that crevice and let the space between your brush strokes be the crevice rather than painting a line in. Because if you paint the line, it's going to look like a line on their face. It's not going to look like an actual crevice. I want to do some of the more red tone on her ear, so I'm going to add some more pyrrole red to this to make a nice kind of warm pinky tone, and just add a few pops of that before we wrap it up for today. So yeah, this lid of the ear has some nice warm pinks. Looking where else? Oh, I've definitely got some pink under her eyelid there. That's gonna look good. And around the nostril, we see a little bit of that. Like I mentioned, that pink or red has a tendency to show up on noses. And then some of our highlights down on the neck too, I can use this more red tone. You probably want to build up some of this color on the neck a little bit lighter. I think I got a little carried away with how dark I made that, but it's usually easier to pull things out lighter than to push them darker. So I have a tendency of erring on the side of going a little bit on darker to begin with, and then just continuing to carve it light if I need to. All right, looking for any last things I really want to add before I finish it up. Yeah, I think I'll probably just finish this one on my own, and then I will share it with you when I've got it good and ready. Thank you all for watching. I'm just going to take one last peek at the comments. Thank you, Jan and Natalie. Deborah saying, I'm enjoying watching the couple minutes I caught. Appreciate the art. Thank you very much, Deborah. And if you all enjoyed this demo, I would love it if you would share the video. It will be available as a replay, so you can share it with anybody and they can always catch it and watch it on their own time. And I'll be doing this again next week, Monday, at 5 Eastern. So thank you all. Have a good night.